video game remake is no easy task. Not only do you have to appeal to the fans of the original title, no matter how old it may be, but you also have to sell this new version of an old game to a newer audience to the video game genre. And while the idea of remakes seem to be really apparent in today's era of gaming, to be completely honest, this is something that game companies have been doing for at least over 20 years now. While reboots and remakes have been an occurrence in almost every gaming generation, basically since the Super Nintendo, I think it's fair to say that only a few of them have ever really struck out and stood against the test of time. And while many may not be a glorious achievement, there are some that people will always point to and sometimes say it even outshines the original. I think Super Mario All-Stars and Resident Evil 1 are some of the finest examples of early remakes being just overwhelmingly positive to the fans. Even if the sales numbers didn't always match what you think they would initially be. Resident Evil 1 is a prime example of just taking the old games, splashing it with a fresh coat of paint, all while still keeping the spirit of the original ideas of the original game. I think a lot of people would say that about Twin Snakes as well, but I actually haven't played that game, so I really can't say. The only Metal Gear game I played was the one with the funny senator in it. Of course, there are other types of remakes out there that choose to take an old IP and re-envision it for the market of today, or the market of the time. Some I think do really well, and of course others, I'll admit it, they tried. But I think the most important thing to do with a remake of a classic game is to let the fans of the old game return to it with a fresh look, but still keep what made the original so good and made them love it in the first place. But also have the new players be welcomed with open arms and have them see why a lot of people loved the original so long ago. And as you've probably guessed, this all relates to the topic of today's video. As Nintendo decided that when they aren't being a dumb company trying to kill the esport nature of their games or just trying to kill games as a whole, they could also make really decent business decisions, and one of those decisions was to completely remake one of my favorite games of all time, Super Mario RPG. That's right, Super Mario RPG. You know, this beloved little SNES title that blew people away back in 1995, blew me away when I was 4 years old in 1997. Good lord, I'm old. However, that's not the game we're going to be talking about today, although it technically is, because yes, in 2023, Nintendo released a remake of Super Mario RPG. Gotta say, that wasn't on my bingo card. To be perfectly honest, this actually, it really amazes me, because as much as everyone loves this game, I felt like the original was just fine as it was. You could still easily play it today, and it's just as good. That may be the nostalgia talking. I just hit my microphone. That might be the nostalgia talking, but I don't know. I think it still plays pretty well, and honestly, I still have a really good time playing it. But then Nintendo decided, no, this game actually does deserve some love and praise, and let's just completely build it up again from the ground up, while still sticking to the original, but bringing it to a whole new audience. And I gotta say, pretty bold move, Nintendo. Gotta give you credit. Now, I really didn't know what to expect with this remake, but there was one thing that I really enjoyed, and that is this man on Gino is on the front cover again. 2023 was a bad year, yet a good year for video games. With the remake, I didn't really know what to expect. I figured it'd be the same game again, but, you know, it maybe spruce up a little bit here and there, add some quality of life, you call it done, and that was it. Ship it out for $93, including tax in Canada. And I'm stupid enough to have bought it, and I pretty much played through it in one day, technically two, but like, it only took me 9 hours to finish, and I gotta say, they killed it. The game is good. I don't know how they did it, but this remake of Super Mario RPG is genuinely one of my favorite things ever. I love the original so much, so I was very hopeful for this remake, and I gotta say, they nailed it. I really liked this one. If you'll allow me a few minutes, I'm gonna go into why I really like this game and why I think it's like one of the best remakes ever done, possibly, but there's a lot to cover, so screw it. Let's just get on with it. Let's just go in and find out why I think this is one of the best remakes of all time. Genuinely, you want the TLDR, go play this game. It's very good. It's a Super Nintendo game at heart, but damn is it good. I had a really good time. Start this video. Come on, it's good. Let's go. While there is probably a bunch of behind the scenes stuff to be discussed, that's not what I'm primarily here to talk about. Instead, I just want to talk about the game at hand, and I'll let the hours of scrubbing through old quotes and interviews to the more focus-driven creators out there. But for those who are unaware, Super Mario RPG was a project in collaboration with Nintendo and the then called Squaresoft, who was at the time just coming off releasing a little game that, I don't know if you guys heard of it, it's called the Final Fantasy VI. I heard it was pretty okay. Their goal was to take the character of Mario and put him into the realm of an RPG. And honestly, I think their goal was met and even further exceeded what they probably originally visioned. It was released to worldwide praise and easily became a classic in the SNES library. I mean, I know people who don't even enjoy many RPGs but adore this game here. And I think there's a lot to this game that would appeal to the audience unfamiliar with the genre. Its humor is very simple but witty, its characters were easy to understand and familiar to those who played a Mario game before. The game being gorgeous as well probably helped a lot. It being one of the last games released on the Super Nintendo, devs at the time understood what limits the console could be pushed to, and they gave it their all for this title. And all these years later, it's good to see that that still holds true today, as the remake essentially does what the old game does, but with new models and enhanced HD visuals and graphics and sounds and everything an HD remake does. It even tells the same story as the original, albeit with a few change in translation that doesn't really change anything to the final product, but it can be a bit odd to those who played the SNES version so much, like myself. I think a lot of people will call this game really easy to get into, and I think its story is where one of those compliments stem from, as Mario RPG's story is fairly simplistic but very Mario in nature. It's a tale as old as time, where the main plot focuses on the gathering of the 7 MacGuffins and to stop the bad guy and his evil army from taking over the world. It's simple, it's sweet, and it never outstays its welcome. And I also think it's why this game did so well with the casual audience. Chances are you probably know someone who's never touched an RPG in their life, but they vibe with Mario RPG because, in truth, it is for a casual audience as well as the hardcore one. I've talked about it before, but sometimes a game telling a simple story can do a lot for someone who's really only used to video games going left to right, trying to save a person or a place. You don't have to worry about a multitude of names and important characters just to be surprised that the guy who looks like a villain was actually a villain the whole time who saw it coming. Instead, you just get Mario and some familiar faces sprinkled in with some new ones, and boom, now you got a whole world and setting that you'll be spending about 10 hours in. And all of its new characters that it introduces are just great as well. I know a fan favorite is Booster, and it's not really hard to see why. There's a little gremlin dude who acts like it's his first day of being human, and the whole time it's built up like you might have to fight him at the end of the chapter, but instead, you just fight a wedding cake. It's perfection. Not to mention the new party members, Mallow and Gino, are also a delight. Little Cloud dude who's embarking on his very first adventure to find the truth of his past, and a star taking a puppet's form in order to save the Star Road and gain the power to grant wishes again. Both are very simple but well-rounded characters that garnered a lot of love from the fan base, especially Gino because, I mean, look at him, he's so gold. And this is helped by how good the writing is for the game as well. While it tells its story, it's never shy to joke about something happening in the scene or something about the game as a whole. Many moments of key characters or NPCs calling out how silly something is, making for a very good time. The bazooka line still gets me even to this day. It's the small things that keep people glued to their screens for hours playing through an RPG adventure with Mario. And speaking of Mario, I think he's got to have some of the greatest energy to bring to the table here. Despite him being the silent protagonist that he is, it's only verbally silent, as Mario almost never stops moving in this game. He speaks his dialogue through movement, and in almost any cutscene he has where he is explaining the plot so far, it's always a blast. Again, him acting like Exor is peak Mario to me. He's just a goofy little dude who will luckily be our vessel for the rest of the journey and whatever obstacles there may be, as there is always danger aplenty on the journey. Alright, so I'm pretty sure I don't have to be the first one to tell you that the original Super Nintendo version of Mario RPG is one of the best looking Super Nintendo games out there, at least in my opinion. And it is easily one of the main glowing points that people often speak about when talking about the game. And I think that the idea of a fully 3D remake of Mario RPG seemed a little bit worrisome to some folks. Honestly, I was even a little bit worried about it, because I honestly just assumed that if Nintendo ever did decide to do this, they would just use the safe 3D renders of characters that we've seen before and just slam them in an RPG format. Luckily, my fears would be washed away with excitement the minute I saw this little scrimblow of a dude. Look at his little gremlin. I love him so much. I love everything about him. He is just so puntable. Like, I could easily kick him across a football field. So yes, luckily the team behind the Mario RPG remake, I'm going to butcher this name, Art Piazza, I think, I don't know. I'll put it on screen. Managed to take the old classic RPG look and aesthetic, and in my opinion, bring it to full life in its brand new 3D era. This is the kind of thing I like to see in my video game remakes. Everything still keeps its small and cutesy charm that the original brings, but now it gets its own unique style in how it's presented. One small addition that I love to the remake are these small little cinematics that play throughout the game every time a major character is introduced. Take Gino's awakening. In the OG, it's a small little scene that shows Gino awakening and getting used to his new form. But in the remake, it feels like a bigger moment due to the cinematography and the movements and expressions that the characters can now show. It's a nice little touch to give the characters a bit more energy and make them stand out as more important, which equally goes for the bosses as well. Love that all the main bosses you fight on your journey get their own little unique introductory cinematics. It's a small touch, but it's something that I could really appreciate. Now, I mentioned this a bit before, that with the remake, there came some change in translation, and I can say that with this remake, it never really bothers me in the slightest. At the end of the day, they are just names, and they are just words, but it was still surreal seeing the first boss not named Mac, or having Yardovich's name changed to Spiridovich. But outside of the small changes, nothing too drastic has ever changed. Well, actually, no, now that I think about it, the Bruce Lee line is gone. So, you know what? What the fuck do I know? I'm actually lying to you in both the thumbnail and the title. This remake just is complete ass. The soundtrack for the remake is something I could have never expected, by the way. The original Mario RPG soundtrack is one of my favorites of all time. The tunes are short and sweet, but very catchy whenever you are going through the different dungeons and towns, whether it be Rose Town or Bandit's Way, or even dungeons like the Volcano or Booster's Tower. Each track has its own use of great instruments to reflect the scene that it's taking place in. Yoko Shimomura handled the soundtrack in the original, and it goes to show that even in her early days, she was on her way to being one of the best composers of all time, really. And luckily for us, she also oversaw the composition for the remake soundtrack as well. And man, it's as good, and in some areas even better than the original. Every track is brought to life in a new way, and while still sounding similar to those who know the original. This was one of my main concerns when the remake was first shown up, but I'm glad that those fears were for nothing. But of course, if you are not a fan of the new OST, good news, you can just switch it back to the Super Nintendo version at any point throughout the menus. Anyways, I think it's time to actually talk about the most important part of the video game, the playing part. And first, I want to talk about moving in the overworld, just overall, because goddamn, I don't know how they made a game which was originally controlled with a D-pad that looked like this feel this good, but my god did they do it. For this version of the game, you can use both an analog stick and a D-pad to move Mario around in the overworld. I personally use the analog stick this time around because there is some sick part of my brain that's telling me it feels a lot different, but really, there isn't any difference between the two. You still only move in the 8 directions, it's just the brain thinks that it was doing better. And Mario feels so good to control that it feels like I'm playing some isometric version of Super Mario World. Whatever direction you hold in the analog stick, Mario is going in that direction, and you have the freedom to change the direction at any time. This was also seen in the original. Even while in the air, movement is not something that is typically thought of in a turn-based RPG, because why worry about movement when battles just happen out of nowhere? But this isn't just a turn-based RPG. This is a Mario turn-based RPG. You can't have bad movement in a Mario game, and it's welcomed here. Love being able to avoid battles just because my reaction time tells me, no, go the other way, and I immediately slip that analog stick to the other direction. Also, it's insane to think that this was one of the first major titles to use enemies on the map, making encounters not random. Glad to see that Lufia 2 inspired Mario RPG, and honestly, you can fucking quote me on that. For real though, I love how much this game feels like a Mario game through and through. I think that's the most important thing for folks who are fans of the traditional side-scrolling games. And although I don't completely love the level design as a whole, I think for the most part it does its job pretty well. I do feel like some areas can feel a bit too squeezed in and close-quartered. I do wish there was more room to move around in some of these gorgeous areas, but hey, it gets the job done, and it's also thanks to that choice that the dungeons never feel like they actually go on too long. Every dungeon or town never really feels too large or overstays its welcome. Okay, well, except for one dungeon, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I know a fan favorite is Booster's Tower, and it's really not hard to see why. This place is nothing but an upward climb using decent puzzles and smart platforming tricks that you gotta utilize in order to get to your destination. There's even a reward for Bowser to find if you pay attention to your surroundings and how the area works. And this could be said for almost all the dungeons in the game too. There's always some sort of secret to find if you look hard enough. The game can look as pretty as it wants, but we are forgetting that this is an RPG, so it's time to focus on the most important part of its gameplay systems. That, of course, are the battle scenes. Now, as I have mentioned quite a bit here already, this game is your standard turn-based RPG, meaning that each entity on the battlefield will have a turn to do whatever it is they want to do. You can attack an enemy with something physical or magical, maybe use a supporting ability, or heck, even flee from battle in some cases. All of these can be one of the outcomes that both player and enemy can choose from. Oh, and using an item. I always kind of forget about that, sorry. And one thing that I really like about this is that every prompt is paired with one of the face buttons on the controller, meaning there's not a whole bunch of menu navigating that's required from a player to use a spell or to use an item. It's just a few simple clicks away, which, okay, really can be said about any old school or even some modern turn-based RPGs, but the simplicity in the UI of Mario RPG makes it feel less intimidating. Not to mention there's no ATB system, so you are free to take all the time you need to make a choice. Which, now that I think about it, is kind of hilarious given that Mario's whole thing in the past, before the whole 3D titles were a thing, was that you had to beat a level before the timer would run out. Very interesting. Although I guess this would technically be the first 3D title to do that since Mario 64 wasn't coming out for a few more months. Anyways, I love this battle system so much, and I think it really stands the test of time that the only thing the remake does with the OG's battle system is build upon it. One of the smaller additions would be the combo gauge, giving bonuses depending on how many timed hits the player has landed. It's nothing too major, but it's still a small incentive to try and land the game's main gameplay mechanic. It's just a nice touch in my opinion. But of course, the biggest new addition are the big team-up attacks. At the corner of the screen, there will be a gauge that fills up whenever an action is done, and once this hits 100%, you are free to do a big team-up special on either the enemy or, depending on your party setup, yourself. It's always fun to see these little cinematics which change depending on what your current party is, and these moves are no joke as the damage or the benefits they give are insane. And I think it's a great addition, and something that including our last topic encourages the player to do, and that is actually switching up your party. Which brings me to my last point of why this remake is so damn good, which is the ability to swap your party members in battle, which is something I always encourage for any turn-based RPG to do. Having the ability to switch out any party members on their turn does so much for the game as a whole. Have a member that's hit with an ailment or is low on HP, switch them out and boom, you have a new healthy party. Maybe you want to have a specific team-up attack, well, now you can. It lets the player use characters they probably wouldn't normally use because they just like how the party is. They have what works, but now you can simply switch that character in whenever needed, making every character viable. And trust me when I say that is a much needed addition for the post-game stuff. Alright, look, I have rambled on and on about the gameplay side of things, the presentation side of things. Let's just stop it right there because I could probably do it for hours. Let's actually break off from this and talk about the other aspect of the game which I think makes a perfect remake of a gaming classic. Although, fair warning, there's a little bit of spoilers ahead, so be prepared for that. But without further ado, let's go into the whole ending of this video and why I think Mario RPG is a very perfect remake in my eyes. So I don't want to go too much on the game's finale and post-game, as I know there are some people, some of which even watch my stuff here, that haven't experienced the remake yet, and I don't want to spoil any of the potential surprises that this game has in store. But what I can say is that this game did everything that I was hoping it would do, and then some. I'll be skipping over my normal ending of the game recap for sanity's sake, but I also want to keep the mystery at least somewhat afloat of the game's ending. But I will discuss a bit of the post-game stuff, as while I don't really consider it a major spoiler, I do think it is important to talk about because it is what makes me love this remake oh so much. So I'll put a time code in the video and in the chapters so that you can skip it if you want to and just hear my ending thoughts. Alright, you did that? Okay, cool, let's get to it. Adding extra boss fights to the post-game content was a huge surprise in my opinion, but what really surprised me more was how difficult they could be. These fights will test your skills at the game, and some even have their own unique gimmick, making it an entirely different fight from the one before. Some of which even test your timing on defenses to make sure you can win the battle by the skin of your teeth. And of course, there is the big super ultra post-game boss, which again, I won't spoil, but all I can say is they basically nailed everything about it. I was in shock when I got there. The dev team really made sure to make this the perfect Mario RPG experience by rewarding the use of the game's mechanics to their full potential. Whether that be the ease of access and understanding to these mechanics or the well-crafted boss fights that are focused around them, the team really managed to take the classic SNES adventure and not only make it their own, but in my opinion, make it a more enjoyable experience. While the game does have mini-games and side quests throughout its story, though not too much, I've always felt that after you beat the game, there's nothing really else to accomplish in it. But luckily, now the game gives the player that little bit more to enjoy, and I would argue it's probably the best part of the game. Now, of course, I do have some negatives to throw out there. Despite the post-game bosses, I do feel like the game as a whole could have used a bit of a balance overhaul in my opinion. Especially with the new team-up attacks added, battles kinda always felt quicker than they really should be. But to be fair, this is also kind of present in the original game as well, but still wish they tweaked the encounters to be a bit tougher. And sadly, they still kept the Bowser's Keep length the same, which is the dungeon that stays a little bit too long for its own good in my opinion, especially with its introduction to the puzzle doors, and I don't even want to talk about it. I never liked that dungeon as a kid. Let's move on. But really, outside of a few nitpicks, I don't really have any negatives to bring to the table. You could argue that it is my nostalgia that's talking and my overflowing love for the original that outshines all the negative thoughts I could have about the game, but like, now listen here, you don't have to be right, okay? But listen, I genuinely believe that this remake is a cut above the rest. No, it doesn't take any risks. And no, it isn't on the level of a Final Fantasy VII remake, but it didn't need to be. What it needed to be was a modern-day imagining of an SNES classic RPG, and damn it, I think it did it. And when writing this video, I went back and played the game again, and you know what? I still had an amazing time. Call it what you will, but I truly believe that this game is a perfect remake for one of my favorite games of all time. I hope you all had fun playing the game as well, because, man, it seems like this game was just kind of loved by a lot of people, and I love to see it. Yeah, a bunch of people I saw playing the game for the first time said they really liked the adventure, and I hope this kind of kicks people's asses into making more because I miss the Mario RPG genre. But that's all I got for you to hear today. I think this game was incredible, and I probably am going to go play it again because I love it oh so much. But until next time, I'm gonna head off here and start working on the next video. So hopefully I'll see you guys soon. I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you in the future. Hopefully. I promise.